September 1916. The telegram arrived at railroad headquarters with diplomatic language but unmistakable urgency. Germany had approached Mexican President Venustiano Carranza with a proposal. If Mexico would declare war on the United States and help Germany tie down American forces on the southern border, Germany would help Mexico recover Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona after the war ended. That the plan required one critical element: a way to move troops and supplies north through Mexico to strike American positions. That meant railroads. And American railroad workers, operating trains on both sides of the border through commercial agreements and shared infrastructure, were about to make a decision that would shape whether World War I came to American soil. The Mexican rail network in 1916 was partially American-built and American-operated. During the Porfiriato, the long presidency of Porfirio Diaz from 1876 to 1911, Mexico had encouraged foreign investment in railroad construction. American companies built lines. American engineers designed systems. American workers operated locomotives and maintained track. When the Mexican Revolution began in 1910, many American railroad workers stayed, continuing operations through political chaos because railroads don't stop running just because governments change. By 1916, the revolution had fractured into competing factions. Carranza controlled the government but faced opposition from Pancho Villa in the north and Emiliano Zapata in the south. The country needed functioning railroads to move troops, supplies, and whatever commercial goods still traveled during wartime. American railroad workers found themselves operating trains for multiple factions simultaneously, maintaining a fragile neutrality that kept commerce and communication flowing. At the German proposal to Carranza, later known as the Zimmermann telegram, when British intelligence intercepted and decoded it in January 1917, required Mexican military capability that didn't exist in September 1916 when initial discussions began. Mexico's army was fragmented, poorly equipped, and exhausted from 6 years of revolution. Moving troops north to attack American positions would require reliable rail transportation to concentrate forces, move supplies, and maintain logistics. Without railroads, any Mexican attack on the United States would be limited to border raids. Destructive, but not strategically significant. American railroad workers in Mexico learned about German interest through the same informal networks that had kept them alive during the Revolution. Railroad workers talk. Information travels along rail lines faster than official communications because maintenance crews, dispatchers, and station agents share news at every stop. By late September 1916, American workers operating trains in northern Mexico knew that German agents had approached Mexican officials about military cooperation and that any serious military operation would require railroad support. The decision facing these workers wasn't simple patriotism. Many had lived in Mexico for years. Some had Mexican families. Their livelihoods depended on keeping railroads running, regardless of which faction controlled which territory. Walking away from their jobs meant abandoning income and homes, and in some cases, people they cared about. But continuing to operate railroads that would be used to move troops and supplies for an attack on the United States meant facilitating an invasion of their own country. The workers met informally in rail yards across northern Mexico: Chihuahua, Monterrey, Ciudad Juarez. Wherever American crews gathered during shift changes or maintenance stops. No formal organization coordinated these discussions. No union issued directives. Individual workers talked, shared information, and reached conclusions that aligned not through central planning, but through common recognition of what was at stake. The consensus emerged gradually over several weeks in autumn 1916. If Mexico moved toward active cooperation with Germany for military action against the United States, American railroad workers would walk off their jobs simultaneously. They wouldn't sabotage equipment. That would be criminal destruction. But they wouldn't publicly announce their intentions. That would give Mexican authorities time to replace them. They would simply stop showing up for shifts. Locomotives would sit idle. Maintenance would halt. The Mexican rail network would lose the operational expertise that kept it functioning. This wasn't a strike in the traditional labor sense. Workers weren't demanding better wages or conditions, and they were making a collective decision that certain work, operating railroads for military invasion of their own country, crossed a line they wouldn't cross, regardless of personal consequences. The decision carried enormous risk. Mexican authorities could arrest them. German agents could target them. They could lose everything they'd built in Mexico. But the alternative, continuing operations that would enable an attack on American territory, was unacceptable. Mexican President Carranza, aware through his intelligence networks that American railroad workers were discussing withdrawal, faced a calculation. His government needed functioning railroads not just for hypothetical military operations, but for daily governance, moving troops to suppress Villa and Zapata, transporting food to prevent famine, maintaining minimal economic activity. Losing American operational expertise would cripple these essential functions. A railroad network without experienced operators and maintenance crews was just metal on the ground. So the German proposal also required Mexico to succeed militarily, which Carranza knew was unlikely. Even with German support, Mexico lacked the military capacity to invade and hold American territory. The revolution had devastated Mexican military effectiveness. Armies were fragmented. Supply chains were broken. Morale was low. Attempting to attack the United States would be disaster regardless of German promises. The railroad workers' potential withdrawal simply made the impracticality more obvious. In November 1916, Carranza sent quiet signals through intermediaries that Mexico would not pursue active military cooperation with Germany. The signals weren't public announcements. Diplomatic considerations prevented that. But American railroad workers received indirect confirmation through the same informal networks that had transmitted the initial warnings. Mexican military operations near the border would continue focusing on revolutionary factions, not preparation for northern invasion. The workers stayed. Locomotives kept running, but maintenance continued. The Mexican rail network functioned through the remainder of 1916 and into 1917. When the Zimmermann telegram became public in January 1917, intercepted and decoded by British intelligence, then shared with the United States, it revealed that Germany had indeed made the proposal to Mexico. But by that point, Carranza had already decided against cooperation, influenced partly by practical military assessment and partly by knowledge that his railroads would stop functioning if he moved forward. As the workers' role remained largely unknown, newspapers didn't report it. Government documents didn't acknowledge it. Railroad company records mentioned operational challenges in Mexico, but not organized worker resistance. The story survived primarily through oral history. Railroad workers telling other railroad workers, knowledge passed along the same informal networks that had coordinated the potential withdrawal. The impact was real, even if unrecognized. World War I did come to America, but through military deployment to Europe, not through invasion across the southern border. Mexico remained officially neutral until 1942. The scenarios imagined in the Zimmermann telegram: German submarines operating from Mexican ports, German advisors training Mexican troops, coordinated attacks on American positions in Texas and New Mexico, never materialized. American railroad workers returned to the United States gradually over 1917 and 1918 as Mexican operations became more dangerous, and American entry into World War I created railroad employment opportunities at home. Some stayed in Mexico permanently. A few were killed during revolutionary violence. Most simply went back to normal railroad work, carrying knowledge of what they'd been prepared to do, but rarely talking about it publicly. The incident demonstrated something about how infrastructure workers think about their role during conflicts. Railroads are politically neutral technology. They move whatever needs moving, regardless of who's in charge. But railroad workers aren't neutral. They make choices about what work they'll do and what lines they won't cross. Those choices aren't always visible or documented, but they matter. In autumn 1916, several hundred American railroad workers in Mexico decided there was work they wouldn't do regardless of personal cost. And that collective decision influenced whether World War I came to American soil through the southern border.